Good evening and welcome to I-24 News Defense Magazine. I'm Alon Ben David with your weekly review of security, intelligence and strategic affairs. In this edition, we take an in-depth look at the nuclear deal signed between Iran and the P5+1. Will the agreement stop the Islamic Republic from obtaining atomic weapons? Will Israel's harsh words translate into military action? And how will Tehran's newfound clout affect the power balance in the Middle East? Let's begin. Iran and world powers signed a nuclear agreement ending a decades-long standoff over Tehran's controversial atomic program. While the United Nations Security Council unanimously endorsed the accord, the deal has nevertheless become polarizing, with some suggesting that the West conceded too much. Shai Ben-Ari examines what's in the details.
The deal reached by the P5+1 countries in Iran, known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, amounts to 159 pages, including annexes. Here are some of its main points. The text of the deal states that Iran will be able to enrich uranium, but only to a level of up to 3.67%, with this limit in place for 15 years. Iran will be permitted to keep a stockpile of no more than 300 kilograms of this low-enrichment uranium, not enough for a nuclear bomb. All higher-grade enriched uranium will either be fabricated into fuel plates, transferred out of Iran, or diluted to a level of 3.67% or less. Nuclear facilities at Fordow and Arak will undergo redesign and reconstruction under Western supervision. Iran will maintain no more than 5,060 active IR-1 centrifuges for a period of 10 years under the agreement, but will be able to conduct research and development on more advanced centrifuges, some of them up to 16 times as productive as the IR-1. This means Iran could significantly enhance its enrichment capabilities after 10 years. One of the issues which has concerned Iran's enemies the most is the matter of inspections of its nuclear facilities. Under the agreement, Iran will allow IAEA inspectors regular access, including daily visits per request, to its known enrichment facilities. In the case of IAEA concern over undeclared nuclear materials or activities, Iran is given a chance to offer an alternative to an actual visit by inspectors. Iran may propose to the IAEA alternative means of resolving the IAEA's concerns that enable the IAEA to verify the absence of undeclared nuclear materials and activities. This means overall 24 days can pass between an IAEA complaint over undeclared materials and a response by Iran. Concerning sanctions, the deal states that Iran's implementation of large sections of the deal will coincide simultaneously with the removal of a range of EU, US, and UN sanctions. This point could prove problematic, as these activities do not necessarily take the same amount of time, meaning simultaneous action could be open to interpretation. Iran agreed to fully implement a roadmap for clarification of past and present outstanding issues relating to its nuclear program, a sticking point in the later stages of negotiations. Still, there are those who remain unconvinced.
Israel is not bound by this deal with Iran because Iran continues to seek our destruction. We will always defend ourselves.
And to discuss that, joining me now from the U.S., Robert Satloff, the director of the Washington Institute for the Near East Policy. Thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure.
The administration, the president, they keep declaring that the only alternative to the deal struck with Iran was conflict. Was that, in your mind, the only alternative?
Well, there's always other alternatives to any situation. Everyone thinks that whatever deal that they struck is always the best deal possible. It's an unknowable situation. Of course, there are 1,001 variables in this deal. To think that this is the only possible outcome is, of course, rationally not sound. It is the deal that has been struck, but there are certainly other alternative deals one could imagine.
You recently wrote that the deal with Iran signals a shift in U.S. policy vis-à-vis the Islamic Republic. Is the U.S. taking a side in the Shiite-Sunni conflict here?
Well, I'm not so sure that it's that we have formalized this shift, but we have certainly made this shift a real possibility. And we have opened ourselves up to partnership with both sides, which itself is an extraordinarily confusing situation. It's not so much Sunni versus Shia. It is key Sunni states and Israel versus the Islamic Republic of Iran. There's a clear divide, and this agreement does make that divide very murky and very gray, because we are now committed to helping the Iranians develop in all manner of fields, and that can only come, in a certain respect, at the expense of our traditional partners.
So is Iran becoming a legitimate partner in the eyes of the U.S. in the fight against ISIS and Al-Qaeda?
I think there's a very real fear that Iran is becoming a legitimate partner without having given up all of its negative behavior. Remember, from the Iranian perspective, the only thing that they are giving up in this agreement is they're postponing their nuclear ambitions till a much later date. The United States and its international partners are giving the Iranians very near-term benefits in exchange for that postponement of the Iranian nuclear ambition.
Right now, Israel is placing many efforts in persuading members of Congress to disapprove the deal. Do you foresee a scenario in which the U.S. Senate and Congress disapprove the deal?
July 20th, 2015 is the first of the 60-day countdown. So trying to anticipate what our political landscape is going to look like 2 months from today, 60 days from today, is not very simple. Lots of things can happen between now and September 20th. As if you looked at the numbers counts today, you'd say it's a very high bar to gather enough votes to override a presidential veto. In our constitutional system, that's a very high bar. Both houses of Congress would have to vote 2/3 against the president. Not a very simple thing to do. But again, between now and 60 days from now, lots of things can happen in our political system, and we have to revisit this periodically between now and then.
Many analysts believe that the accord with Iran would encourage more Middle Eastern nations to pursue nuclear capabilities. Do you think a regional nuclear arms race is imminent?
Well, I think it is unlikely that other states in the Middle East are going to stand idly by if they see that this agreement actually legitimizes Iran's nuclear program and its nuclear enrichment program, to be specific. Now, if indeed the Iranians will be postponing their threshold status ambitions for a number of years, it's not as though other states are going to nuclearize overnight. It doesn't quite work that way. These are not simple programs. You can't just go to a Walmart or a Target and buy yourself a nuclear program. These things take time. This agreement does allow for time. And so it is an eminently reasonable possibility to see the implementation of this agreement go parallel with the investments by other major regional states, perhaps the Saudis, perhaps the Turks, perhaps others, in the development of their own nuclear programs.
As Jerusalem continues to bash the nuclear deal, speculation is building that Israel's military option may be back on the table. But what would such an operation entail? And is there a historical precedent for such a move? I-24 News editor Charles Biblizer takes a deeper look.
June 7th, 1981. A squadron of F-16s takes off from an Israeli Air Force base and travels over 1,600 kilometers just south of Baghdad, in the process violating both Jordanian and Saudi airspace. Operation Opera successfully destroys Iraq's Osirak nuclear reactor. The so-called Begin Doctrine is born, referring to the Israeli government's preventive strike counter-proliferation policy. Ironically, the mission comes 1 year after Iran's attack on the same facility, which caused only minor damage. September 6, 2007. Israel launches Operation Orchard. Multiple fighter jets reportedly violate Turkish airspace and cross into Syria, destroying a suspected nuclear reactor in the Deir ez-Zor region. Ironically, Iran, by then Israel's mortal enemy, is Syrian President Bashar al-Assad's foremost patron. Fast forward to July 14th, 2015. World powers in Tehran forge a nuclear agreement which Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu describes not as an historic opportunity, but rather as an historic mistake.
The deal gives Iran every incentive not to change.
He immediately convenes his security cabinet. Reports speculate that Israel's military option is back on the table. But what would such a mission entail? Unlike in Iraq and Syria, Iran's nuclear infrastructure is spread over a vast area, some of which is heavily fortified. Such an operation would likely require a huge fleet, which would need to be refueled mid-flight, and perhaps even a supplementary ground force. Moreover, Iran's defense capabilities are not insignificant. Between 2011 and 2012, Netanyahu reportedly had his finger on the trigger, but eventually backed down due to opposition from top defense officials, as well as pressure from the Obama administration. Does the IDF have the capability to roll back Iran's nuclear program militarily, and would the benefits of doing so outweigh the costs? There may be no clear-cut answers, but one thing is known. Israel has a long history of beating the odds when it comes to covert missions deemed imperative to national security.
And joining me now in the studio is General Eitan Ben Eliyahu, former Commander-in-Chief of the Israel Air Force. Thank you for joining us.
Good to be here.
When the Prime Minister says that all options are back on the table, does Israel still have a viable military option against Iran?
Well, theoretically, yes. Absolutely, yes. Actually, in fact, if you look around, if you look at the Middle East, you always have to be ready. And you have to be ready to very large varieties of options. And one of them is a long distance, including Iran. And I believe if you're asking me what are the chances today, well, I would say it's around zero for the short term. But we need to think about it long term. The option to use the military forces, it might come up with no,
if the Iranians would try to breach?
If the Iranian, and then we will face, a new reality, a new circumstances, which not only that it will be an option, but this will be the only option.
I remember conversations that we had when you were commander of the Air Force 16, yes. 17 years ago.
Yes.
You were building the force with a strike on Iran in mind. Does the fact that Israel never exercised its option in the 16, 17 years since means that the option wasn't attractive enough?
Well, it doesn't mean that the option is not on the table anymore, but I mean, we understand much better what does it mean, a military option. If I may say, a military option needs the right conditions and the right circumstances to execute it.
Political conditions?
Absolutely. And this needs to be an international cooperation. I would say, if you look at the Americans or the Europeans, you look at the leaders of the world, of the Western world, they never go up to such distances without forming a coalition in advance. So needs to be at least with a small coalition that number one ally would be United States. But if the agreement will be violated by the Iranians, I believe that forming a coalition between Israel and the United States is obvious. So this is why I'm saying that technically the military option is also, by the way, it's also changing based on the equipment that you have, based on the a new intelligence information that you have. So you always update it. But most important is what is the atmosphere, the international atmosphere, the conditions. If you were considering going and executing a military options before, then always they kept telling you, well, but yet we have to make sure that we have given the chance, to diplomacy and to the sanctions. Now we are after it. So if anything happened, then no one can say, well, let's wait until we take all the advantages of the diplomacy. It's gone. It's over. Now it's a new circumstances.
And assuming that Iran will fully comply with the agreement, and in 15 years from now, it decides that it wants to produce a bomb. It complied with the agreement for the time being, and now it wants to produce a more enriched uranium. Do you see Israel then doing what it did in 1981, Baghdad, Deir ez-Zor, 2007,
okay,
Syria?
Let me tell you this. Let's say what you're telling me is let's close our eyes and wake up within 8 or 10 years. Well, first of all, it is very difficult to predict the conditions, what will be the conditions, and the circumstances in 10 years. I mean, I cannot draw the entire picture of what's going to happen in these years. But what I'm telling you right now, and very clear, I think that Israel needs to acquire the right equipment and to have the good plan and to continue and monitor very, very carefully all the intelligence information and to be ready and to exercise and to update the plans. And it needs to be, if not on the table, at least under the table for the rest of the time. And this is what Israel should do. And I think this is what Israel should do with a very close cooperation with the United States and the European.
And I think it's certainly doing it. Thank you very much, General Ben Eliyahu, for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And with that, we conclude this show dedicated to the Iran deal. Be sure to visit us again next week for another edition of I-24 News Defense. For all the latest headlines, log on to www.i24news.tv. Have a safe night from Jaffa Port.